First time I saw your profile, you had, I'm not sure exactly the number, it was 4K, 4,000 followers or something like that. And now you have way more. I think probably a part of these followers, they are coming from this article.
Oh yeah, for sure. No, it'll be a good probably 60 or 70%, I reckon, from the article.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, I love that article, by the way.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I had a look at some of your stuff when Rodrigo asked me to be on this podcast, and it sounds like we're talking about some very similar things, and also cool that you play tennis and ski and guitar as well. There's things that we have in common. I saw that. Yeah, fellow hobbyist.
Very cool. Yeah. So, Alex, what really piqued my interest in talking to you was reading your article. Really struck a lot of bells with me, and I think I love the way it was written. I think the form was really cool, and I think it's rare to see, for me at least, to see writing that I look at and like, oh my God, this is good, this is authentic, and this is coming from a place of someone who's really thought about this a lot. And then obviously I also love the content, but would love to hear from you, what made you write that and what was behind that. And yeah.
Well, firstly, thank you for the compliment. I'm glad you liked it. It's a good question, and I've had it a lot because there was a big pushback from that article from people that had worked corporate jobs and then found out that I've not actually worked a corporate job myself. And so they were kind of like, yeah, who are you to say? And it came about because I was traveling Latin America with my friends, a group of 10 friends that I'd managed to convince to quit their jobs and come on this big adventure with me. We went to 10 countries over 7 months. And yeah, because they had quit their jobs, they were all kind of asking, what's next? And we were having that conversation a lot. Yeah, when it came time to start applying for things, the options that were on offer for them were, in my opinion, kind of meaningless corporate jobs. They themselves couldn't even articulate to me what the job really was. The kind of impact they would have in that role was completely unclear. And so it kind of got me thinking, this is not a good state of being in our society. Our kind of most ambitious and intelligent people shouldn't be focused on these kind of roles. We should have them focused on solving the more important problems. And so, yeah, I kind of got talking to them, those that had had corporate experience. Then I got home and I booked in a bunch of calls with my friends that were working in corporate jobs. And just from a place of curiosity, I said, what do you envision the kind of next 5 to 10 years of the corporate world looking like, and how do you expect AI to impact these organizations? And yeah, it just became really clear to me through the stories that they were telling. I really think that there's going to be a massive shift, and through the stories of some kind of friends and contacts of mine, I wanted to highlight some of those potential shifts. And I wanted it to come from a place of, look, I don't have the answers, but here are some kind of macro observations, some things that I'm seeing, and open up a conversation as to what might be the implications and how the changes will manifest in these organizations.
That's amazing that you wrote that without having a corporate job. I wouldn't have imagined that. I thought that, you because clearly you did your research. I mean, you had a lot of good observations around it, and you mentioned some of this backlash. Was there any thing that was very full of animosity, or was it just kind of like, hey, you don't know what you're talking about?
There was some animosity, particularly from people who were kind of more senior at the tail end of their corporate careers, because essentially, I mean, I can imagine it's not nice to hear that, the work that they'd been doing for the past 30 years was meaningless, or, there were people that had really kind of committed to climbing the corporate ladder. And I questioned, whether that would be a smart bet to make in the next 5-10 years. And I think a lot of people got defensive about that. Yeah, I had to put out a note afterwards and to say, look, just to caveat, I'm not an expert. I'm not saying that I've got all of the answers, but I want to open conversations, and I'm talking from a place of observation, conversations, kind of pattern recognition. And I'm happy to be proven wrong. If people wanted to have conversations with me and say, this is why you're wrong, and here's the data, then I'm fine with that. But actually, more people have kind of, even senior people within these organizations have reached out to me and said, you're spot on. You're absolutely right. You've called out something that has been kind of weighing on us for a long time. And I think that if I reflect on why the article went viral, I think it's that had been this quite strange culture of not talking about it. Everybody kind of knew it was going on, but nobody wanted to put a name to it. And so when somebody that's not really part of the culture, not part of the kind of the corporate world, comes in and says from an outside perspective, this is a bit weird that this is happening. Why is nobody talking about it? And then suddenly everybody's like, oh, okay, he said it, let's start talking about it. And so, yeah, I think that was my experience of the moment.
Yeah, that's such an incredible power of writing, right? You gave voice to something that was silent, and then all of a sudden there's like a lot of this barrage of voices that want to be a part of that conversation. I think that's fascinating. And one thing that you said really that I always think about is you can work in a corporation that has a very cool end goal, but even then, often your role gets reduced to something that's meaningless and completely disconnected from that end goal. And it's very, very hard for companies to tie what people do in their day-to-days to, whatever the mission is of their organization. And I'm wondering, have you thought much about this? And, do you think that there's a way around this, or is this just the nature of large organizations?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And as I'm having more and more conversations with people who have much more experience than I do in the corporate world, this is emerging as a theme. What you talk about, this distance from the impact that you're having. I think that most people would want to see the output of their hard work. Yeah, the phenomena that you have in these large organizations is that it has to go through many levels. You make a decision and then it goes through 10 different people through some kind of email chain, and it's changed in so many ways that by the end of that chain you kind of, was that me? Was that somebody else? I don't really know where's the impact that I'm having. And so I'm seeing that a lot. Part of where that comes from is inefficient systems. The thing is with corporations is they're just such enormous entities, like they're so huge that as soon as there's kind of a little bit of disorganization or mismanagement, you begin to see gaps emerging where people are talking about the same thing in different language or talking about different things in the same language and doing the same job, and there's overlaps and there's gaps. And so I envision a world where AI, it kind of cuts through all of that. The optimist in me wants to say that it will make these systems a lot more efficient, and that might mean people losing their jobs or people's jobs being reimagined. But what I hope that means is that you don't have so many layers of kind of bureaucracy and red tape. People will be more in tune with the impact that they're having. I've really tried to explore the problem from the supply side and what does it mean to be an employee of the future. I've done less work on the demand side, how companies can think about becoming employers of the future.
Do you think you could ever be an employee?
Yeah, I mean, the way that I define the term employee might be slightly different in this context. In a large corporation, definitely not. If it was an organization where the company itself was working on solving a problem I was really interested in, and I could see the impact I was having, potentially. Never say never, but I think most likely not. I have always struggled to work for somebody else.
It's funny because just hearing you talk, I was thinking about the term employee, and comes from the French employé, and the term itself is like removes so much agency from those who that term is ascribed to, right? Because you're being literally employed by something, and it's outside your control and how they're employing you. It's not like it's very different from a collaboration, right? A collaboration, which in my opinion is something that has more future, is where people are exchanging thoughts and ideas, and where the very nature of the projects is up for grabs, and it becomes a very the very nature of the term is a very top bottom kind of thinking, right? The enterprise decides how and where and if and when they're going to employ people, and you're just the employee is basically a very passive passenger in this situation. And I think your article, in my opinion, challenges that a bit. It's like, especially the part about the opportunity in the emptiness. I think that's something that I really resonate with, is if you start from a place of truth, whatever truth means, and I guess, I'm not talking about absolute truth, but whatever truth is for you or for me or for Rodrigo, then you can at least do something about it. But if you stay in that pretend zone, it's really hard to do anything. And that to me was a real call for the article, and just to create a bridge. But Rodrigo and I were in this space that's heavily, heavily impacted by AI, right? This translation space. there's another motif that you were talking about that also plays a lot in our space as well, which is the generational gaps, how people from different generations react to all of this. And we can talk about this more, but just to put it out there, I think, our space has, for the first time, we've been working with this idea of machine translation for a long time. But machine translation was typically in the 90s and the early 2000s. It was more a source of ridicule and mockery and the inefficiencies of a machine than anything else. It was something that translators could take pride on how sloppy the machine translation mistakes could be and how embarrassing they could be. And so it was there, it drove some business efficiency, but it wasn't really driving many people out of a job. But then, with ChatGPT 2023, people really began reconsidering things. Like, well, this is pretty good. When I submit a translation here, I can understand it. It's more often right than wrong. And it started to shift the way people thought about it. And most translators in our space, even though this is where I think it's super interesting, even though they're freelancers for the most part, they work with a very employee mindset. So they're freelancers, but they don't feel like they're empowered. They don't feel like they can choose their clients. They don't feel like they can choose their projects. They feel like overall, and I'm generalizing, but we have quite a lot of data that supports this, that their rates have been going down over time, that their work has become more and more commoditized. They were forced to work to use technology like ours to do their work. There's this big feeling of disillusionment and disempowerment where, prior to this, translation was almost like a work of magic, right? And someone happened to know two languages and they were able to make other people understand each other, other documents intelligible. So it was pretty magical. If you needed to understand something and someone could make that happen for you, that was pretty cool. And now it's kind of like the magic is gone. It's like now they have to prove their value against this pretty powerful machine. Because of that, there's all these little struggles and splintering that happen. So, and this is also where perhaps the point of convergence, where I really want to get your thoughts. So you compared this to the death of a religion, right? So, and you mentioned how it's interesting how religions, they don't die all of a sudden. They take a long time to die, and there's splintering, and there's the heretics and the fanatics, and there's all kinds of things that happen in that process. And we can go deeper into this, but just based on the things that I'm telling you and maybe anything else that you've heard, do you see any parallels between what you saw, what you wrote in terms of the death of the corporate role and kind of the death of a translator, or do you see it as completely different things?
No, I'm sure there are parallels. Yeah, it's a really interesting example. Yeah, it's rife for disruption. I had the experience, so learning languages in school, for example, Google Translate would get you the literal translation, but it would never get you the kind of the nuanced translation, and it was really easy to tell. So I speak Spanish, for example, and if I read something that's written by Google Translate, you can really easily tell. Whereas ChatGPT now is able to understand the kind of cultural nuances. I think that there's still a space for translators, and probably it means that there's space for less translators now because it's a more kind of niche skill. But it's understanding now that ChatGPT or AI in general understands the cultural nuances, it's the implementation of those cultural nuances in an emotionally intelligent way. Right. So you can imagine, for example, I don't know, a foreign diplomat or something. I'm sure that in many languages there are kind of paralinguistic cues. There's intonation that would imply anger or rage or excitement, all of those kind of things. And having the emotional awareness to spot that and implement the cultural nuances is something that I don't think AI could touch really, because it's a really emotional thing, or at least not in the short term. So maybe the role of translator shifts from a more kind of practical, do I just have a really comprehensive understanding of the language and the words and the vernacular, to, it's less about my understanding of the words and the grammar, and it's more about my understanding of, or my ability to read people, my ability to stay calm, diffuse tension or encourage people or get people excited. Those are more kind of emotional skills. So and the parallel there with the kind of death of the corporate job is we'll move to a place where companies will look for more emotionally intelligent, more emotionally aware people who were able to kind of read between the lines and pick up on cues, rather than people who previously would have just been kind of shut up and behave, do as you're told, fit into this box. And it's funny, this has come at an interesting time, because I wrote another kind of article on LinkedIn that made the prediction that CVs will be redundant in 5 years. And I got a lot of pushback. A lot of people really didn't like that prediction. And my argument is essentially that in 5 years' time, companies that want to survive the kind of AI revolution will have to hire people that are high agency, independently minded, creative thinkers. They're able to adapt. They're able to kind of take initiative, and you can't get a sense for those skills based on a CV. Listing my work experience in this place, my qualifications in this place. You can't really get a sense for is this person able to operate with emotional awareness, have take responsibility for their decisions. All of these things are kind of beyond the procedural capabilities of AI. And so, maybe there's your parallel, but it's a really interesting discussion. And to be honest, translation isn't a world I'm familiar with, but really interesting.
No, I get it. I don't want to put you into the hot spot, but or the hot seat, but even without being at all familiar with the translation, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's about embodied emotional intelligence. I agree. I mean, that becomes the core differential. And I think even if a machine can pretend and emulate emotional intelligence, it's another thing to validate it and to make that decision. And at least the way we see it in our space, I would say that there are people who are very bullish around a machine-only kind of scenario where it's like you don't need humans anymore, and you can have instantly subtitled things, and you can have instantly translated documents, and they're pushing hard for that world. And then there's the resistance. There's those that are like, no, this has got to be only human. Language is a human thing. It's a part of human culture, and we can't have this level of interference. And we're looking for a place where you can have both, where machines can take care of the cognitive burden that is mechanical and not necessarily something that only humans can do, and then humans can take care of the aspect that you're talking about, the making these emotional decisions based on cues, based on reading between the lines. But I find that there are two things that I want to ask you about. That one is the machines end up becoming a mirror for who we are. So we're seeing ourselves in reference to these machines. And now let's say typing fast is no longer something important. The machine can type faster than I can, no matter how fast I can type. Fixing a spelling mistake isn't something no longer important, at least in my mind. I don't care about spelling mistakes for a while now. But for some people, those things are still very important, not having a typo and I find, for instance, now I am actually proud of my typos. I think, okay, that's a sign that I'm a human behind the wheel. I'm thinking about this, and it makes it even, whether it's more accessible, more endearing, whereas like a few years ago, a typo was a typo. But anyway, I think that one, there's like this questioning of identity, who are we in light of these machines? And then the other thing is, who are we in the question that you've been pressing a lot, who do we become through this? And I guess my question is, I have a very ambivalent relationship with change. So I pursue change a lot, and I also avoid change as much as I can, or not. I wouldn't say I avoid it. I pursue it, but it's really, really hard. It's really hard to like real change, not like change that, I'm changing if I'm working standing up or sitting down, but like real change, like when change that defies my concept of my identity. So like, for instance, a good example of change is, for a long time, I went into the office every day, and we had a bunch of people that I would greet. And I felt that was my purpose. I got up so I could go to the office and I could greet a bunch of people, and whatever I did was secondary. Like, the first and foremost thing that I did was going to the office. And when I moved away from our headquarters, and all of a sudden I didn't go to the office anymore, I felt just like this immense, undescribable emptiness. I mean, I had been doing that for almost 15 years, and all of a sudden, this is no longer a part of who I am. And if I want to create meaning, I have to learn how to do this in a different way, in a way that I don't know. And I had to for a while sit with that emptiness and sit with that, like this state of just not knowing and not having a purpose. And it's an awful state, but in my opinion, great things come out of that. And wanted to see your thoughts on that, on, how hard change is, and if there are anything that you think people can do to feel more comfortable about this discomfort.
Yeah. So generally, I'm very positive about the future of AI and the changes that it will bring. There's a great article by the CEO and founder of Claude, where he kind of outlines the radically positive case. Everybody talks about the worst case scenario, but so generally, I'm very positive. I think that there is a danger where people outsource their critical thinking to AI and their decision making to AI, and for the most part, that's still where humans are better, and so we should still be looking to develop that skill. I think that embracing the discomfort will be really important in this transition period, and it's particularly applicable to the corporate world, because for years and years, people have been pushed into these molds. And they've had their kind of individuality pushed out of them. You're told to be a certain way, and if you don't fit in, you're not going to do well. You're not going to, it's all part of playing the corporate game. And I think that AI, will bring about a change which allows people to reintegrate with their individuality. That's a hugely positive thing. People can be creative again. People can lean into what makes them unique, lean into their specific experiences, their unique composition, their innate abilities. And I think that's a hugely positive thing. And it will be scary for people for the first time, because they'll be forced to, confront who am I, and ask themselves questions that might feel really. You can imagine if you've been told for 30 years who you're to be, when you're finally given space to explore that on your own, like that could be a really daunting thing. But I think obviously what comes out of the other side of that process is a extremely positive thing for society.
Yeah. I'm listening to what you're saying, and I'm thinking, you were talking about like the emotional intelligence part, and let's say the death of resumes as well. And I tend to agree with that. I mean, you read that post on LinkedIn. It's true. I mean, I don't look at resumes. I haven't looked at resumes for the past, 10 years or so. And I do think that we start getting into territory where, like, let's say we're hiring for emotionally intelligent and highly cued people. I don't have a hard stat on that, but I would have to guess that a small minority of people in the workforce meet that requirement. I would say that most people in the workforce are mechanistic by nature, in the sense that they do a certain trade or a certain job pretty well, often really well, but they're not necessarily incredible at this emotionally nuanced aspect of their work. I mean, you could have dozens of examples, whether it's a boss who's an asshole, but really competent at arriving at those quarterly goals, or you don't even have to go so extreme, just people who perform a certain job or a certain task, but aren't necessarily, super dialed into the world around them and how people are being moved by this. Anyway, I just think it's a small amount of people who come to the workforce with this kind of skill. I don't even know if it's a skill, but let's call it a skill, with this skill that's really well developed. So then you have a few different issues. Number one is for those that don't have this skill, or even this potential, or have been doing, maybe they do have the skill, but they've been hardwired for like 30 years to do something a certain way. And it's really, really, really hard for them to change at all from this. And if anything, they're going to become more marginalized, less important, less valuable. So I agree with you that for society and for those individuals that can embrace a greater sense of identity and individuality through AI, which I do believe, I see this. I mean, I see this in my own life even. I think that some of that is true, but there's so many people that are really going to lose something in this process. And do you think it's just a matter of opening up? Do you think everybody can do this as long as they have an open mind? Or do you think like this shift creates kind of like a great filter where certain people are just going to be left behind?
Yeah, it's a great point. I'd push back on something you said there a little bit, which is, by nature, a lot of people kind of lack emotional intelligence. And yeah, I'd question that. I don't know if it's by nature, or if it's just that they haven't been in a context where they've, been allowed to develop that muscle. And so I think that will be the key point is, I don't actually know if there have been any studies done onto is emotional intelligence fixed or dynamic. And it'd be interesting.
I'm sure there are studies, and you're right to push back on that term. I should have said not by nature, but by context is better for sure. But the thing is, if you think about it, it requires even, and I agree. I mean, without seeing any study, I would tend to agree that it is a teachable thing. It is something that you can learn. But then you need different kinds of institutions to teach those things, right? You're not going to be spending all this time with 9-year-olds learning about history. They're probably going to be learning more about other things and in other ways that are more about interactions and cues than, for instance, memorizing things, just as an example. But that then requires teachers who can teach that as well, because you can't have someone who's not emotionally in tune with things teaching that to other people. So you start to get into this issue where it's just very hard for people to break out of this cycle. I mean, I'm sure that there's a way to break out of this cycle over the years, over a decade or whatever time is necessary, but it's a violent process for those that aren't able to make that shift. And I don't even think that we can create the necessary apparatus to help people perform this shift. At least that's the feeling I have.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think that whether people will adapt are kind of two separate questions, and being practical about it is what I hear from you. Is are we actually going to move to a place where regardless if it's a question of nature or nurture, will we move to a position where there are a lot of people that through years and years of neglecting this muscle has it kind of atrophied to the point where it's not actually practical for them to find a job or find work or do something that involves emotional intelligence, and what happens to those people. And yeah, that's a big question. I don't have the answer. The thing is, there is still process-driven work left, but it's process-driven work that's left, right? Is things so that broadly speaking, practical or personal, are safe from AI for the kind of the short term. And if you're not personal, then you've got practical left. I think the people that will really, really struggle are people that aren't practical. Maybe they're knowledge workers, and they're not very emotionally intelligent, and they've been doing highly process-driven work that's expensive, right? I think those people are really that's the group that will struggle.
You just described a lot of translators.
Oh, really? Yeah, because there's huge incentive to outsource it because it's expensive. If you're like a street sweeper, for example, there's less, or like a bricklayer, there's less incentive to outsource it because the implementation of the technology is really costly. The work is fairly volatile in the sense that it's, you might have loads of work one week and nothing the next week. And so you'll probably save for a while. Whereas if you're somebody that has like consistent workflow, it's highly predictable, highly replicable, and it costs a lot. There's huge incentive for whoever's paying you to outsource it. And if you're not emotionally intelligent and you don't have something else to offer in your understanding of people or your kind of empathetic understanding of problems, then yeah, it's tricky for you. It's going to be really, really hard.
And it's really interesting talking to you because I had, whenever I read something that I like, I try to imagine the author behind it. And there's a few very important messages that I read from your work. One is, let's stop pretending, because pretending is only harming us. And I think that's a really important point with this whole stuff that's happening, just because I feel like in general, it's almost like this denial is the typical first human response, right? Let's just, and not just any denial. Let's deny even it more heavily. Let's lean into the denial. Let's really pretend like everything is just okay. And I see that a lot across these spaces. Again, with translators, it's more common that I see either denial or I'm just giving up on this profession entirely than this more gray area where it's like, okay, this is happening, this sucks, but I can do something about it. I can change. I can think about different things. So I think that call for like, let's stop pretending, I think it's such an important concept. And I think it's so underdone by people. And I think you put that in example also in your writing, like the example of a failed marriage where like both people are, living together, but they know it's dead. They know, but they just don't acknowledge it. And it's just that step of like acknowledging and is such an important one. And then the other thing that I find super important as well is once you've acknowledged that step, thinking about that opens up like and you talk about this, like this grief, this emptiness, but that's also where any real change comes from, right? You can't.
That's where the growth happens.
Yeah, at least that's my perspective. I mean, you don't have new things while old things are going on. You need to have some kind of dip in the old so that you open up space for the new, and that space is really, really uncomfortable. And again, that's really it becomes a recursive problem as well, because if you have emotional intelligence, I think it's easier for someone who has a lot of emotional intelligence to deal with that emptiness and to deal with letting go than someone who doesn't have emotional intelligence. It's like the more emotional intelligence you have, the more it opens doors for you to change and be comfortable with the discomfort and to be open to the unknown and all these things. And the less you have, the more likely you're just going to run away from those things. So I'm wondering if you have any ideas of what people can do to break that cycle and A, acknowledge, and B, feel more comfortable with that discomfort.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's so important. We really need to be kind of intellectually honest with ourselves and ask, let's stop trying to kind of catch each other out, get off on technicalities. What are we talking about here? What's the situation that we face? Because I think adaptability in the face of this huge change is going to be the thing that separates those that are able to kind of weather the storm and those that fall behind. And the first part of adaptability is being really clear about what you're facing and what needs to change. So yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be uncomfortable for a lot of people, as you said. And there will be this kind of, it further favors those kind of emotionally intelligent people. And so my kind of thinking is just to advise people to say, you have to be honest with yourself, and you have to develop some kind of framework for understanding, am I being accurate? Am I being true to the situation that I find myself in? Yeah, it's going to take a lot for people, but I think it's the only way.
I don't know if the word you were thinking about self-fulfilling, but that's what I was thinking, like the self-fulfilling cycle. Yeah. And what's funny is, we're in completely different spaces, but in my space, I try to bring a message that maybe I'm not able to deliver it as eloquently as you were, but I try to deliver a similar message, like this idea of let's stop pretending, things are changing, and it's going to be better for everybody if we stop pretending. But I'm typically met with people will typically either put me in some kind of little silo where it's like, oh, okay, so I'm the pro AI guy, or I'm the anti-human guy, or whatever silo they're going to put me in. And whenever I talk about more uncomfortable things like letting go or death, the typical reaction is like, no, nothing's dying. It's like, everything's okay. Like, people don't want to acknowledge in general sad or uncomfortable, hard emotions, especially in public. And I'm wondering, have you given this a lot of thought, or do you feel this as well? Like, do you think people are open to talking about the complex side of these changes and emotions?
This is something that I think, if you want to kind of use death as the example, it's cliche, but life is a cycle, and with death comes rebirth. And you can choose to focus on what dies, or you can choose to focus on the space that leaves for something else. And I think that's where a lot of this divide on the kind of AI pessimism versus optimism comes from, is that do you choose to focus on all of the things that are going to be destroyed, or do you choose to think of the rebirth that comes with that? And for me, I don't know if it's because I'm young and naive, maybe, but I want to focus on the rebirth, because I've still got the majority of my life left, hopefully. And, I don't want to just sit here and think about everything that's that's gone and, be sat there, on my porch at 80 years old thinking about the good old days. So yeah, all of this to say that, back to our kind of earlier point, one of the things that is rebirthed is people engaging with creative work again, people reintegrating with their uniqueness, what makes them an individual. And I think that's a beautiful thing. Yeah, there's going to be death. It's inevitable, but there's death in, every part of life. And, the helpful way to think about it, if you want to be positive about the changes that are coming with AI, is to reframe and think about the rebirth rather than the death.
You brought up age, and I think that's something super cool, because in my opinion, I don't see, at least based on the people I know, which aren't that many, but I don't see a correlation between age and this mindset. I see, in fact, the opposite. I know people in their 70s and 80s who are doing something different because of the opportunities that are arising from AI. And I know people in their 20s who are sitting in that metaphorical porch complaining about the good old days. And, whether there's a whole generation of students, for instance, who studied translation only to graduate and find out that there are no more, that the jobs they thought were going to be available for them aren't there anymore. Even for computer scientists. I mean, for many, from over the good part of a decade, if you wanted to be employable, just study computer science. That was like this given thing. It's no longer a thing, because if there's one part that's being really hit hard in terms of like, sure, you need the skill, but people are looking more, like you said, for agency, for creativity, for initiative, these different things. So now just having a computer science degree doesn't automatically mean you're going to get a high paying job. And I think, I guess my question is, do you think that this is a matter of age, or do you think this is more a matter of mindset?
Probably a bit of both, but probably more of the latter. There's 4 older generations. So this is probably where the age comes into it a little bit more, but also the mindset is that a lot of people who have been through these structural changes to society, whether that was you were around when, a complete industry was displaced, maybe you were a miner in a Welsh town and, your job was taken by machinery, and you can imagine somebody that's happened to, the real thing, that the quality that allows them to be optimistic or pessimistic there is resilience. Is like, how do you react in the face of change? If you're somebody, it's a really horrible thing to have happened, and you're somebody that's defined yourself by that, and then of course you're going to have this mindset of, oh, it's all horrible, there's no silver lining, and it's going to be really disruptive and destructive as a force, versus somebody that's been resilient enough to kind of move through these changes in a positive way and come out of the other side with a different outlook, can then approach the problem and say, I've been here before and I'll be fine. Yeah, there's that. The question of resilience, I think, is really important, and the way that age comes into it, I think, is that it's simply that people who are older have had more opportunities to test their resilience, right? But you can be born a more resilient person. That's something that is partially innate and partially learned. So yeah, there's this kind of dichotomy. There's this matrix that I use, which is helpful, and I need to be careful here because I've been using it for so long that honestly I don't know if I made it up or somebody else did. But you can have kind of an active or passive approach to optimism and pessimism. And so I think that, so you can imagine the kind of matrix, and in one corner you've got kind of active pessimism, which is essentially evil. It's like, I understand that things are bad and I'm actively going to be doing things to try and make things worse, or to play into that kind of the bad. Then you've got passive pessimism, which is essentially nihilism. It's things are bad, what's the point? Nothing, there's no point in anything. And then you've got kind of passive optimism, which is where I think that probably quite a lot of people sit in the question of AI. Actually, sorry, people in general in AI are kind of one of the two passive options. But the passive optimist is someone that obviously sits there and says, things will be fine, it'll work out for themselves. And if you're in that category of people that we talked about earlier, and you're not particularly emotionally intelligent, or you haven't been given the context to flex that muscle, you're doing highly procedural work and it's expensive, and you are kind of at risk, and you're sitting there and you're passively being optimistic and saying, it's going to be fine. Be careful, do something about it, find a way to kind of flex that muscle, develop your emotional intelligence, because otherwise things will be really tricky for you. And then of course we have the active optimist, which is, what I think that people should try to be in the face of a huge kind of structural change, which is, of course, things can be great, but we need to do something about them. We need to react. We need to be a part of the positive change. And so that's been a useful kind of framework in my life in thinking about how to react to these massive changes.
I love the framework. I had never heard this matrix before, but I'll quote you on that. I love it. I think I would agree with you. I would say the vast majority of people are in some spectrum of passive, whether optimist or negative, or optimist or pessimist, and often a little bit of both, like navigating between both. But I think you touched on two key things that are always on my mind. One is resilience. And I think the resilience is, maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's a precursor for you to be active about something, because if you're going to be active about something, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. You're going to get a lot of things wrong. You're going to be really frustrated, because that's what it means to be active. I mean, you're going to hit your head against the wall more often than not. So in my opinion, the resilience is almost like a precursor for this active state. And then the other point, which you touched on as well, which I don't know if I like to call it more creativity or more agency or a bit of both, but that is the actual thing behind that active stance, which is the agency or the creativity behind that. So I think, when I talk about AI, I really think about these two concepts, like resilience and agency, or resilience and creativity, because without them, you can't be in that place where you're making something with whatever is happening. You're just, like you said, you're standing by, you're hoping, you're watching, but you're not really doing something about it. I wanted to have a vibe check from you. Like when you look at people around you, do you see people gravitating over to this like optimist active spectrum? And if not, what do you think people can do to try to get themselves there?
So to the first part of your question, do I see more people moving to a kind of active position? I would say yes, but that's maybe a reflection of who I choose to surround myself with more than a reflection of society. I don't know. Yeah. I read a lot of pessimistic narratives around AI, and so I couldn't comment on society at large, but definitely so I'm an entrepreneur, and as a part of the entrepreneurial community, I think that definitely people are moving towards an active position. So what can people do to be more active? I think obviously clarity comes from understanding the situation better, and so really getting clear on what AI can currently and will be able to do will help people understand where to focus their time and energy. And also on the flip side of that, understanding what they really need to still be able to do. Like I spoke to the point earlier about like people outsourcing their critical thinking and their decision making. That's one of the things that I worry about in AI, is that sometimes I catch myself doing it and I have to stop and I say, is this something that really, like, am I damaging my ability to think for myself here? And that seems to be a conversation that's happening more. And so, with that comes an understanding of I have to be like disciplined and diligent in, these are things that I need to retain. These are skills that I need to retain that I shouldn't be outsourcing to AI. And so I think that helps people be active, is understanding what it can do really well, so you know where to focus your time and energy, and then also what you should continue to do, what will still be a valuable skill set, 5-10 years down the line.
I love that. I think that reflection on how we use it ends up shaping who we become. I think it's super real. And it's a very subtle too. I mean, I see all kinds of people thinking about prompt engineering and all kinds of activities, but ultimately, if you can't reflect on the nature of your interactions with other people and a machine and AI, it's really hard to evolve from that, because ultimately you're just copying and pasting prompts, copying and pasting things. And I think it's this, you touch on it a lot, but I think it's the emotional capability, the reflective nature of humans, of being able to really not just think once, but sometimes hundreds of times over, does this make sense for me? Am I becoming the person that I want to become? And how is this little action shaping me? I think those are the things that are really going to change the outcome of things for individuals and for the groups in which they belong to. But yeah, I think you phrased it.
It'd be really interesting to see, I think, just on that point, like look at it from an evolutionary perspective. If you see what's happened with food, or thousands of years ago, if you found sugar, you'd eat all of it. You'd eat everything that you could get your hands on, and now we have, this abundance. Problems like obesity arise. Same thing with like sex and porn addiction, or free dopamine is a dangerous thing, or like really low effort dopamine. And I wonder if there's a similar pattern that we'll see with ChatGPT, where there is something about the dopamine hit that you get after like really kind of chewing on an idea and thinking something through deeply, and you kind of get to the end of it and you're like, yeah, no, I've really done some great work there and I've figured something out. Will we lose will the dopaminergic responses to thinking change in the face of AI, where people can, just ask a question of AI and the answer comes out and people say, yeah, oh yeah, that's good enough. I didn't think about it myself. I've got the answer. And when people aren't incentivized with dopamine to think, that could be quite a dangerous thing. And so we'll see what happens with that. But
it's a great point. I would argue that the dopamine is a consequence of the emotional investment in trying to arrive at that thought. I think personally, it's my perspective. I could ask GPT something and it could give me a wonderful answer. If there was no effort on my behalf, I don't think the dopamine is nearly as present as if I, really think about something and try one thing and another thing and hypothesize. And after a few days or hours, I arrive at something. I'm like, oh, okay, that's cool. I wouldn't know how that plays with people at large.
No, me neither.
But Rodrigo, you've been quiet and just working with AI all this time. Any thoughts?
I was just watching, and then our conversation led us to this, how we can reskill in face of all this AI change. And then while you guys were talking, I was thinking, because many of the people that I know, they are great in adaptability. They started this process internally, like internal rebellion, not as a compliance way to mold into the market. You know what I mean? My thought is more about like, we are creating new modes into put, people in some qualities that essentially starts inside of us in a rebellion, inner desire of do things differently. And then, so that will end up being, again, new modes, or even all these new skills. It seems all people that brings these skills, they are more like they created by themselves, not as a feature to be compliance to, get a new job.
I mean, I really resonate with the point. I mean, I think you're arguing that, and it goes a lot with what Alex was saying, that it's not enough for you to just be divisive about it and think, okay, I want a job, therefore I need to think about how I'm going to be more of an independent thinker.
Yeah.
It's you kind of need to be almost like, screw this thing of just doing what everybody says. Therefore, I'm going to be a more independent thinker, and maybe that's going to land you a job, maybe not, but I don't think you can reverse engineer it. And I think that's kind of like what I'm hearing from you. It's kind of like everything is born out of a more primitive human urge to non-conform, to rebel, to learn, to do things differently. And the way I see this connects a lot to Alex. Alex was touching on a little bit on this, but to me, that is emotional intelligence. It's like being connected to your deeper desires. And yeah, I don't know, Alex, what you think.
I agree, and I resonate with the point as well. I think that, yeah, on the part of the individual, it requires some kind of level of risk. You know, I'm going to make a bet on myself. I see everybody doing this other thing, and I'm going to make a kind of calculated decision to do something completely different. And that's why I think I say that kind of understanding is so important, because if you can kind of think in first principles and you can get to the core of, you know, what AI can't do, what AI can do, and perhaps what are some of the long-term consequences of that, you reduce the risk as an individual on you know, behaving a certain way. You know, if currently, for example, you're in a workplace that still favors this kind of shut up and behave type person, and you resonate with that, and you're listening to this, and you hear and you say, oh, you know, actually I have been like that, and actually the systems that are in place incentivize this kind of behavior, you know, then there's the question to ask yourself. There's a risk in saying, actually, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to start operating in a different way. And so to reduce the risk, you need to understand from your own perspective, you need to do the work to understand what it looks like in the next 5-10 years if you start to interact with your emotional intelligence, the tools, everything else in a slightly different way.
I agree. Alex, it's been great talking to you. I mean, congratulations on your work. Congratulations on all your thoughts. I mean, I think you're really onto something, and really helped me think about a lot of things. And I think it has a lot of positive messages as well for people in our space too. And yeah, if people want to get to know more about you and your work, where should people go?
Yeah, so active on Substack, active on LinkedIn. My Substack newsletter is called Still Wondering. We're currently in the process of building a community for the professionally lost called Midweek. And I'm also developing a tool, software to help people go through this process of change, particularly people that are struggling to find meaningful work. And that's called True North. So I'll be kind of building in public, sharing what I'm learning as I build these projects. But yeah, Substack, subscribe, see if you resonate with what I'm saying. I'm very kind of open to having more conversations with people at this phase in my career. It's all about, you know, talking to as many people as possible, understanding the problems from different perspectives. And so, you know, I'm having 50, 60 calls a week at the moment with people just talking these things through. And so, yeah, if you disagree with me, agree with me, want to kind of pick my brains, then drop me a message. And yeah, I'm happy to talk more about it. Very
cool. Well, thanks so much. I really, really enjoyed our conversation and exchanges. And yeah, I learned a lot. And again, very grateful for your article. For me, it was highly inspiring.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation as well.